Welcome into another episode of Friar Territory here on the Foul Territory Network. I'm Kyle Glaser. We have a very, very special show today, crossover edition with Scott Coleman of Hammer Territory to preview the upcoming weekend series between the Padres and the Braves. Scott, it's good to see you again. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Hey, Kyle, thanks for having me on. Nice to see you again. I know we talked a little bit before the season begins, and you blink, and now it's Memorial Day right around the corner. And I don't know, in my mind, that kind of signals like it's no longer early, like it's go time for teams, and it's you don't have the crutch of it's early, it's April, it's early May. It's very much go time, and hopefully this weekend the Braves and Padres have a good series ahead of them.
Absolutely. It's interesting you note how much things have changed since the beginning of the season. The Padres and Braves obviously opened up the year against each other. The Padres swept the four-game series on their way to a 7-0 start. The Braves then went to LA and lost three more to start the season 0-7. Since then, the trajectories of these two teams have more or less flipped. The Padres were able to push it to 15-4, but since then, it's been a rough go. That's really, really crystallized this past week. They entered the series on a 6-game losing streak. They've lost 8 of their last 10. The Braves, on the other hand, started 5-13, and since then they were able to push back over 500 a few days ago. They've since dropped back under 500. They lost in extra innings against the Nationals in their final game before heading into the series. But the Braves more or less have been on the upswing since that opening week of the season, where the Padres, the trajectory has mostly been down over the last 3 weeks or so. How would you characterize the state of the Braves right now going into this series?
It's a great question. And it's funny, after the weekend, the Braves won a series in Boston against the Red Sox, played really well. And it kind of felt like the team was starting to figure some things out. You mentioned they had a terrible first week of the year, but since then, the Braves, if not the best record in the National League, had been very close to it. And we're seemingly figuring some things out, even without Ronald Acuña Jr., without Spencer Strider for the most part. Jerkson Profar has not been on the team because of a PED suspension. So it was hardly a clean runway for the team. But then they just lost back to back really tough games against the Nationals, and they're back below 500. And I don't know if anybody going into Memorial Day weekend would tell you objectively, a game below 500 with a pretty much zero run differential. That's about as average as it gets.
No question. And you mentioned the Braves have had a lot of injuries. Ronald Acuña Jr., of course, has missed the entire season so far, recovering from his second ACL tear. Spencer Strider started the year on the IL, came back, got hurt again. Sean Murphy missed the start of the year. So the Braves haven't been fully healthy most of the year, but they're starting to get there. And the big addition, of course, is Ronald Acuña Jr. He was scratched from his final rehab start for AAA Gwinnett. He is reportedly on his way to Atlanta and set to be activated at some point during the weekend. Whether it will be for the opener Friday versus Saturday is still to be determined. But the 2023 National League MVP is returning to the Braves lineup. Anytime a guy is coming off of a torn ACL, you understand it might be a little bit before he gets fully back to form. But at the bare minimum, I would imagine this is going to be a pretty big morale boost, even if it takes him a little bit of time to get going on the field and get his timing back.
Oh, it's huge for this Braves team. And I think Acuna, kind of like Fernando Tatis Jr.,
Yeah.
just such a dynamic talent and just can change a game with one swing, one play in the field, one moment on the base paths. And the Braves have kind of lacked that spark, I think, in the early going of the season. And frankly, they were really lacking it last season too when Acuna tore his knee at the end of May. So everybody is excited. The team just announced or confirmed that Acuna will be back. I'm sure he's going to get a monstrous round of applause whenever he steps up for the first time at Truist Park over the weekend. And frankly, the Braves need Acuna back. And he may not be the 2023 MVP. I think, frankly, that's probably asking too much of a guy who has not played in the majors in a year. But the Braves need him in the worst way because they have the Padres, they have the Giants, they have the Diamondbacks, they have the Phillies, they have the Mets. I think 7 of their next 8 series are against teams that are currently in the playoffs or right on the cusp of it. So it's go time for this Braves team, and hopefully Acuna can give them a little bit of a spark and kind of get them back to doing what they want to do offensively.
Yeah, absolutely. And it should be a great matchup. The Padres are throwing their 3 best starters during the series. They'll have Nick Pivetta, Michael King, and Dylan Cease against a Braves lineup that has Acuna back for at least part of it. it just makes it that much more of a marquee matchup. Scott, with that though, the matchup that is going to be most important from the Padres perspective is going to be the Padres hitters versus the Braves pitchers. The Padres offense has been struggling in a bad way during this 6-game losing streak. They scored 1 run in each of their 3 games against the Mariners, were then shut out in back-to-back games against the Blue Jays. They scored 6 runs against the Blue Jays in the finale, but still lost in extra innings. It has been a rough stretch. And in the opener, they'll be facing Chris Sale, who has returned to his NL Cy Award form over his last 5 starts, 2-1 with a 1.72 ERA, 40 strikeouts against 8 walks and 31 to third innings. What have you been seeing from Sale recently over these last 5 starts?
So a couple of things with Sale. So of course he wins the Cy Young a year ago, and it was basically smooth sailing the whole way for Sale. To start this season, and really it started in that series in San Diego, Sale was not really finishing his pitches the way I think he wanted to. He has that nasty slider, but he was leaving it up in the zone, especially on 2 strike counts. And instead of getting a strikeout or weak contact, he was giving up a lot of hits. The fastball command was not as sharp as it usually was. And then Sale was also just running into some bad luck. He was running the highest batting average on balls in play by a mile compared to the rest of the league. And, that's something a lot of the time pitchers can't always control. So you mentioned, the great stat, 2-1, 1.72 ERA over his last 5 starts. I think some of that is the luck has kind of bounced back in his favor. But Sale has also really gotten the strikeout ball working with that slider and then working the fastball in and out, keeping hitters off balance. And of course, I know you mentioned San Diego has been fighting it offensively, but I mean, from afar, there's just so much talent, especially at the top of that lineup. And it's really going to push Sale he better be on it or he's going to pay the price.
Yeah, and that's going to be the interesting matchup. The Padres in general, even when they were going well this year, they were struggling a little more against high-end lefties. We saw Shota Imanaga shut them down a few times. Just in general, the way their lineup's constructed, especially some of the platooning at the bottom of the order, they've struggled a little bit against lefties. And now that they're not going well, going in and facing the reigning NL Cy Young Award winner and potential Hall of Famer, who is pitching at his best, at least on paper, it's not a favorable matchup for the Padres. Then again, there's lots of matchups that look favorable or unfavorable on paper, and then they go completely the opposite way. That's baseball.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, and it's Pivetta pitching for the Padres on Friday. Is that correct?
Yes, Nick Pivetta is going on Friday, Michael King on Saturday, Dylan Cease on Sunday. So again, the Padres will have their best arms going, but it's going to be about their offense because we've seen games where their pitching staff does their job, but you can't win if you don't score. And there's been a lot of times the starter departs, it's only a 1 or 2-0 deficit, and then the offense just can't do anything.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. And you mentioned Sale being so good lately. On Saturday, the Braves are going to throw Grant Holmes,
Yep.
who has this great story, was a journeyman for basically a decade in the minors, was a former first-round pick, never worked out.
Yep.
Came to Atlanta as a reliever, and they've converted him to a starter ever since. Holmes has been really good the first time through the lineup, but the second and third times he's really struggled. So if you're looking for storylines, can Grant Holmes navigate this very talented Padres lineup a second and a third time through? And then for the second time this season, the Padres will see Spencer Schwallenbach, who... It's weird, Kyle. He is a very unique pitcher in the sense that he's young. He's basically been in the majors for a year.
Yep.
He somehow throws too many strikes. Like usually you see these talented kids come up and they have all the nasty wipeout slider, the big fastball, but they can't throw strikes.
Yep.
Schwallenbach has a strike problem. He needs to learn how to waste pitches or get hitters to chase out, expand the zone. It's unique, and Schwallenbach has been pretty good for the most part. He pitched really well in a losing effort that first weekend in San Diego. I think that was a 1-0 game, if memory serves, that the Padres won. That's another fascinating storyline with Schwallenbach. He's going to throw strikes. He really doesn't walk many, but sometimes he throws too many strikes, and then he'll leave an 0-2 slider in the zone, and it gets crushed instead of a ball that should have been bounced a foot in front of the plate.
Yeah, again, very talented arm, 6 different pitches. I loved him as a prospect when I was at BA, and you certainly see that ability to be a 1, 2, or 3. But there's something to be said for pitching in and out of the zone, being able to get a chase out of the zone when you need one, and sometimes getting too much to the plate. But The way the Padres offense has been performing, he can get as much of the play as he wants. The Padres just haven't been able to capitalize on much of anything. Scott, we're going to take a quick break, hear a word from our sponsors, our friends at Arena Club. Then we're going to dive into the state of the Padres offense and exactly where the issues are coming from. Keep it right here on Friar Territory.
I just want to say, before Arena Club, if you were trying to very actively buy, sell, trade, it was very complicated and used a lot of mail that was unnecessary.
Yeah, I didn't even know how to do it, but I'm glad we have Arena Club now because it's a one-stop shop for everything card related.
It is. And right now, you can get 20% off your first slab pack or your first card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/FOUL. Use code FOUL. If you're a collector, you've got to check out Arena Club. Go get after it.
All right, welcome back to Friar Territory. Kyle Glaser alongside Scott Coleman from Hammer Territory. Scott, you mentioned earlier in the show that this is a very, very talented top of the Padres lineup. And there's no question that's the case when they're on their game. But they haven't been on their game recently. So the Padres offense as a whole during this 6-game losing streak, they're batting .201 as a team. They have a .552 OPS, which is the lowest in the majors in that time frame. And they've scored 9 runs in 6 games, which is also the fewest runs in baseball in that time frame. And what's happened is the stars at the top of their lineup have gone silent. Fernando Tatis Jr., Manny Machado, and Jackson Merrill are a combined 10 for 71 during this 6-game losing streak, batting a combined 141. And the biggest issue with this Padres team, and we knew this coming into the year, was they did not have a lot of depth. This was going to be a team even more so than other teams who similarly are top heavy. It was going to be extra pronounced for the Padres that they needed their stars to play like stars and stay healthy. When one of those two things don't happen or both those things don't happen, this offense loses all of its juice. And we have seen that recently when the Padres' top 3 stars all go silent at the same time. This offense literally cannot score. Again, 9 runs in 6 games. Luis Ariz has been hitting well. Gavin Sheets has provided some power, but the big 3 need to perform, and they're just not performing. When you look at the Braves pitching and how they've been performing, the starters, the bullpen, do you feel like they're equipped to continue these struggles for the Padres, or do you feel like this might be a chance for the Padres to break out?
I will say, anecdotally, I feel like Fernando Tatis Jr. and Jackson Merrill have just killed the Braves the last couple of years. And Tatis had the monster wild card round last year, and I think Jackson Merrill was hitting like 700 after that first weekend this year. So maybe the Braves are what the Padres need to kind of get out of this funk. From afar, those numbers are shocking.
Yeah,
that's I feel like San Diego's top 4, top 5 are as good as anybody's in the league. Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, Sale is really rolling right now. Yeah. We talked about Holmes and his limitations and strengths, and same with Schwellenbach. I will say the Braves bullpen this year, after a couple years of having a terrific bullpen, has really struggled at times. On the whole, their numbers are okay, especially after a pretty rocky start. But this is a bullpen you can get to. Yeah. So that's another opportunity. If San Diego can't get to the Braves starters, there are some opportunities later in the games to get those bats going. And I'll say, too, you mentioned the Padres struggling. It's probably music to your listeners' ears. The Braves have really struggled to score, too. This offense, despite the names and the talent, has been painful at times. I think they're in the bottom 3rd in the National League in just runs scored. There was a point last week where the Marlins and the Nationals had both scored more runs than the Atlanta Braves. That's kind of impossible, right? And the reason the Braves are 500 is because the pitching has been really good more times than not. But still, I mean, this is not, if you had to ask me with a crystal ball, I don't foresee a bunch of 10-8 baseball games. I'm guessing we're probably, especially with the pitching matchups, going to see a lot more of the 3-2 variety than the big numbers, crooked numbers multiple times a night.
And I think it's important too, whenever you're focusing on just one team, it can seem like your team is having the worst time of anyone. The Mets have a lineup with a lot of big names. They've been struggling to score recently. You mentioned the Braves. Again, you look at this lineup, even with Ronald Acuña Jr. injured, even with Sean Murphy out earlier in the year, you still see Austin Riley and Ozzie Albies and Matt Olson and Michael Harris and so many guys who we've seen change games over the course of their careers many times over. What has been the Braves' primary issue on offense?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much talent and name recognition in this Braves lineup, but a couple of things probably come to mind. They've really struggled with runners in scoring position this year. Their numbers with runners on base and in high leverage spots has really been bad this year. It's gotten a little bit better since the start of the season, but lately it's just, man, it's frustrating. Every night it feels like they have a lot of runners left on base. And then just they have guys underperforming too. Austin Riley has been fine, but not the all-star level third baseman that we have seen. Michael Harris and Ozzie Albies both have an OPS of about 600 right now, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I think Michael Harris figures it out, but Ozzie Albies just doesn't look great right now. Matt Olson had kind of a slower start to the year, but Matt Olson has picked it up. Really, the two hitters all year long who have been really good for the Braves, Marcell Ozuna, who continues to do it into his mid-30s, and then Drake Baldwin, who is a rookie catcher who has kind of taken the league by storm, has just been incredible for the team. And Baldwin is rotating basically every other day with Sean Murphy, who's also done a good job offensively. But again, it kind of gets back to what we said off the top. This team really needs Acuña in his bat at the top of the order. And hopefully that kind of energizes and keeps the line moving the way it frankly just has not done enough early in the year.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of parallels between these two teams. The starting rotation is mostly doing its job. The lineup has been a little bit sketchy, especially of late. You mentioned the bullpen. We saw that during the opening series. The Braves bullpen lost a few of those games. Hector Neris coming in, giving up a game-winning home run to Gavin Sheets. He was quickly DFA'd, is no longer with the team, is now a member of the Angels. The Padres bullpen was dominant early. They relinquished a lead just one time in the first 34 games. They had an ERA around 1.5, almost a run better than the next best bullpen in the league. And then things have fallen off recently. They've blown a lead now in 5 of the last 14 games they've played. And that includes the finale against the Blue Jays, blowing leads they inherited in both the 10th and 11th innings in a brutal extra inning loss. So the Padres bullpen was dominant, is not the case now. You mentioned the Braves bullpen can be gotten to a little bit. How would you assess it overall right now? Who are the players who are pitching well, who are not pitching well? Who are some of the guys that maybe the Padres could take advantage of?
So I think it all starts with Raisel Iglesias, who is the Braves closer. Yep. Iglesias has really, really struggled in the early going. Yep. Now, he's pitched better lately, but the last couple of years since Iglesias came to Atlanta and really his whole career, this guy's been one of the better ninth inning closers in all of baseball.
Oh, yeah.
He's been really shaky this year. So that's been something the Braves have lost some games close late because of Iglesias. And, the one kind of probably biggest under the radar loss for this Braves team that lost Max Fried in the offseason and Charlie Morton and Travis d'Arnaud was not necessarily a player leaving, but a player who got hurt. And Joe Jimenez was arguably the best setup man in baseball last year. Yeah. Big fastball, nasty slider. And Jimenez had a routine, or what we thought was routine, cleanup procedure in his knee. And he's now going to miss basically the entire year. Yeah. I think that was something that really maybe the fan base didn't fully appreciate just how big of a loss that was, because the 8th and 9th inning for the Braves last year was basically automatic, and it has been anything but. They do have some other guys who have some name recognition. Aaron Bummer is a lefty who's been around the game for a long time. Bummer's stuff his velocity is down, and he just hasn't been great this year. Dylan Lee has been around for a while. Lee is fine as a lefty. Pierce Johnson used to be in the NL West, if that name's familiar, with the Rockies, and has bounced around. Pierce has been pretty good for the Braves this year, but
he's actually a Padre too. He was a Padre who brought him back over from Asia.
There you go. Well, yeah, so it's full circle for Pierce. He's probably been the most reliable reliever for Atlanta this year. And then they have a couple other arms who I think fans just kind of hold their breath and close their eyes when they come in. And it's funny, Kyle, you talk about the Padres' woes offensively. The Braves have their own woes. Yeah. It sounds like it's been maybe a inconsistent pitching staff is maybe a fair – these two teams sound really similar to each other. I think the big difference is one of them started out 7-0 and one of them started out 0-7.
Yeah, definitely peaking at different times, no question about it. One final thing I'm going to be watching this weekend. During that opening series, the Padres ran wild against the Braves. They stole 9 bases against them in that 4-game series, 5 in the opener alone. The Padres have not been running anywhere near as frequently. They stole 23 bases in their first 15 games. Since then, they've stolen only 13 bases the entire other 30 plus games. So they're not running wild like they used to. That said, it is a tool they have in their toolkit. Have the Braves improved their ability to control the run game since that season opening series?
They have. And the way the Padres ran on the Braves opening weekend was shocking.
Yeah.
Like everybody was looking around like, how? Like, did the Braves forget they need to like look over at first base and throw over or step off or change up your timing on the pitch clock? It was bizarre. It has calmed down significantly. I think the pitching staff has done a better job, and both Sean Murphy, who was out that first weekend, and Drake Baldwin are behind the plate in throwing runners out. But I think a lot of that was just on the pitching staff, just almost forgetting to consider the run game. And it felt like the Padres would get a walk, and then they would steal second, and then they would get a hit, and a run would come in. That was a real formula for San Diego that first weekend.
It was a real formula for them, really, the first 3 weeks, and then they've stopped running, and it's all gone downhill from there. So I'll be very curious to see if they try and pick it back up, or if, like you said, the Braves have made such stark improvements that the Padres just don't even try it again. Half the battle is getting on base, which is something they've really struggled with recently. All right, Scott, there's one final thing. I want to go back in the time machine and talk about Braves prospects when I was at Baseball America and relive some very fun moments I had with Braves and Braves Twitter during those years. Going to take a quick break, hear a word from our sponsors, and then we'll jump right into that.
FT fam, let's talk about the HOF app. If you're into parlays, but sometimes you're missing the mark more than you would like to, can I introduce you to some serious analytics on an app that is easy to read and comprehend? And I'm sitting next to a man who knows how to place a parlay.
Yeah, and the biggest thing is breaking down a parlay. With this Hall of Fame app, there's the situations that you'll find easier to do. It's very helpful and understanding. And if you like, gambling, sometimes this is really good to know. So get on there, get on that Hall of Fame app and check it out.
Yeah, this is info that will help you, okay? With a 4.9 rating in the App Store and over 6,000 five-star reviews, safe to say that HOF has already helped a lot of people bet smarter. For a limited time only, FT listeners can get a 7-day free trial and 50% off their first month when they use code FOUL at checkout. Download the HOF app on iOS or Android. Enter code FOUL and you're all set.
Welcome back to Friar Territory. Kyle Glaser alongside Scott Coleman. All right, Scott, back at the end of last decade, when I was at Baseball America doing all the prospect rankings, the Braves were our number one farm system back-to-back years. The Padres were our number one farm system in 2019, and those really strong farm systems helped fuel their success. The Braves, of course, winning the World Series in 2021, becoming the perennial NL East contender that they are, and really World Series contender many, many years. The Padres reached in the postseason 3 times in the last 5 years, winning a playoff series each time. It was a fun time. And I want to go back to some of those players that were in the Braves system that are now starring for them: Austin Riley, Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuña, etc. Whenever you have prospects, you have these high expectations for them. Sometimes even when guys don't meet expectations, they can still be good players, but they're almost seen as disappointments, which is kind of silly. When you look back at those Braves farm systems, again, Acuña, Riley, Albies, Max Fried is a big part of this as well. How are those guys viewed within the Braves ecosystem right now? Are they viewed as guys like, yeah, they lived up to it, or are they somehow viewed as are any of them viewed as disappointments despite actually having decent careers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, the answer probably depends on who you ask. In terms of a rebuild, the Braves got a 99th percentile rebuild.
Oh, yes.
And what's funny about rebuilds is you think about all the moves, the wheeling and dealing that John Coppolella and John Hart did. And of all the trades, you think, okay, this trade made sense. This trade made sense. This one immediately paid off. This one didn't. But then you think about a deal the one that sent Craig Kimbrell to the Padres. Well, the return for that wasn't anything special, the prospects involved. But the Braves got a draft pick, which turned into Austin Riley, who has been comfortably a top 3 third baseman in the game for a couple of years now. So it's funny how rebuilds work, and sometimes the highest, most touted players you never hear from, and sometimes guys who were prospects but not top tier players by any means end up having a great impact. So, you look at like Ronald Acuña Jr., for example, signed for a minimal dollar amount
$100,000, and he was going to sign with the Royals for even less until the Braves called him on the last day. I actually wrote that feature when he was the minor league player of the year for us at BA, and I was the one who broke that story. Again, it's crazy to think he was going to sign for even less than $100K, and the Braves came in at the last minute and gave it to him.
It's amazing. And then how many kids do we see get $1 million, $2 million, $3 million? They don't even get above AA ball. It's
Braves fans know it well. Kevin Maiton, I can talk about for a long, long, long time, seeing him in Danville and knowing right away that this was a problem.
Yeah. It's, and it's, look, it is so, I don't have to tell you, it is so hard to identify, draft, sign, develop, and then sustain that talent at the major league level. But, there was a once upon a time with the Braves system. I think it was at the conclusion of 2016 going into 17, and you looked at their top prospect list, and it has to be one of the greatest collections of minor league talent in the history of baseball. Acuña, Fried, Albies, Riley, Dansby Swanson, like even Dansby Swanson, who was the first pick, maybe not like a superstar shortstop, never emerged as like your Fernando Tatis Jr.'s or your Carlos Correa super high ceiling types, but a really good shortstop for almost a decade now.
Yep.
It's, looking back on it, it blows my mind the Braves were able to come out of that rebuild in 3 years so strong, able to win a World Series. And now, it's funny, Ozzie Albies is the longest tenured Brave at this point. And in my mind, he's still like 23 years old and a kid coming up for the first time. So it's, obviously when you're losing 100 games a year and rebuilding, it is not fun. John Coppolella did an all-time interview, the former Braves general manager, with I forget who, and he said, the reason people don't rebuild is because it is bleeping miserable every single day.
Yes. No question about it. And it's interesting because the Padres rebuilt shortly after the Braves did. And look, these two teams exchanged a lot of talent. You mentioned the Craig Kimbrell trade. There was also the Justin Upton trade, which is how Max Fried became a member of the Braves. Yeah. It's interesting because these two teams took different approaches. The Braves brought up most of their homegrown talent to the majors, got them established, and then traded the quote-unquote leftovers to go get your Matt Olson, to go get your Sean Murphy. But the core was homegrown guys they brought to the majors. Again, you mentioned Riley, Acuña, Albies, Swanson, Fried in the rotation. Even some guys who have since appeared out, like Ian Anderson. We all know he's pitched 5 no-hit innings in the World Series. That was a huge boost for them. I covered that one. And then you also have some guys, though, like the Padres, where most of their best players that they draft and developed are doing so for other teams because they traded away most of that homegrown talent. You look around the league, you have Andres Munoz in Seattle dominating right now. We've talked about Max Fried, of course. Trey Turner is a great example of this. You go down the line, even guys like Cal Quantrill, Ty France, who have had nice careers. David Bednar was an all-star closer with Pittsburgh. The Padres' only homegrown guy that they drafted and signed themselves is Jackson Merrill. They did acquire Tatis before he played a single professional game. They do get credit for developing him up through their system, but it's two different approaches to a rebuild. It's just kind of interesting to see. Again, both had number one farm systems. Both took different approaches to how they use those players. Yeah. And look, the Braves are the team with the World Series and the multiple division titles. Their method has been more successful. But again, in theory, at least, both of these teams should continue to be good for the foreseeable future, even though right now, again, as you mentioned, the Braves are under 500 and the Padres are in the midst of a really, really ugly losing streak. Sometimes it can be hard to lose sight of that in the moment.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, I'll never forget, we did a crossover episode on the Foul Territory Network with the Mets podcast. Yeah. And they were kind of laughing at us because they were like, we want the Braves problems. Like the Braves problems are problems we want. And I'm not saying that, I have no skin in the game. I'm a fan. I do a podcast, but it is all things with perspective. And really now that both San Diego and the Braves have come out of it and have been highly successful in recent years, and the World Series in 21, sometimes the ball just has to bounce your way for a couple of weeks. And frankly, I thought whoever won last year's NLDS was winning the World Series.
No question. Those were the Padres and Dodgers were the two best teams remaining in the postseason once the Phillies were eliminated. And yeah, both teams were better than the Mets. Both teams were better than the Yankees. And realistically, both teams whoever won that series was going to win the World Series. And tip your cap to the Dodgers. Their pitchers came out through 24 consecutive scoreless innings, came back from a 2-1 deficit, and got the job done, but that's why they play the games. And now the Padres are trying to get back there, and the Braves are trying to get back to the postseason where they normally are as well. These two teams met in the wild card series last year. The way both teams are playing right now, I think they're both hoping to get back to the postseason this year and hoping to face each other. So we'll see how it all shakes out. Scott, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate your expertise and insight.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle, for having me. Happy to come on anytime, and should be a really good series in Atlanta. Two very talented rosters, and hopefully, even if only one team can win, hopefully this is kind of a leaping off point for a much better June, July, August, September on the horizon.
Absolutely. It should be a great series ahead. This has been another episode of Friar Territory here on the Foul Territory Network. Go ahead and give us a review, like, subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. And please, please, please go ahead and subscribe to Hammer Territory. Those guys do a great job as well. We look forward to the upcoming series. Thanks again for watching and listening. We'll see you next week.